Schimpff is a Charleston County School Board candidate who wants to represent the West Ashley area. He tells me why exclusively in this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
Hunter Schimpff, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of all the videos and work that you do, shining a light on all the kind of state and local decision makers, and brings a light to our democracy. So really appreciate what you do.
You're welcome, and thank you for your support of Quintin's Close-Ups. I know that obviously you are a candidate for the Charleston County School Board, and you want to represent the West Ashley area of the school board. Who is you? Who is Hunter?
Yeah, good question.
I was being grammatically incorrect in the beginning.
No, that's totally all right. So, like to fish, spike ball, if you want those sorts of things. But no, so I'm an educator at heart. I started my career in the classroom as a high school math teacher. I actually taught at an international school in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. From there, I went and got a master's degree in education policy at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Subsequent to that degree, I actually worked for the mayor of Nashville, supporting early childhood education policy and adult education policy for the city of Nashville. So the mayor at the time was, putting an emphasis on what we would call the bookends of K-12 learning. Ensuring that children had a really strong start prior to entering the public school system. And there's a significant need for adults and adult literacy services. So that was my focus after the master's degree. I then moved to a nonprofit called the Tennessee Charter School Incubator, where we help to incubate high quality charter schools in Memphis and Nashville, Tennessee. So did that work for quite a few years, and was proud to say that we provided some new public schools for some of the highest need neighborhoods in Memphis and Nashville. Really proud of those schools and the opportunities that they brought to families. I'm just really proud to be a part of that effort. Subsequent to that, I moved to South Carolina and took a job with the state charter school district. So I was on the leadership team there, overseeing state charter schools. So, there were schools in Greenville or statewide virtual schools or schools here in Charleston. So I worked all around the state, helping to authorize new schools and also holding charter schools accountable, which is also, another important component of the charter school world, is holding those schools accountable. So did that for 3 years, and then just really had a tug to focus more on the work that needs to be done in Charleston. Anybody is a resident here, they know that our public schools need a significant amount of support and improvement so that we have a great public school for all students. That's really what led me to run for school board. I really wanted to bring my educational background. I also have a finance background.
Right.
Wanted to bring that educational experience to the school board. I think we need fresh leadership on the board. I would not say that the district has been trending in a positive direction of late, and I think that needs to change. So that's really what motivated me to run and ensure that we have a great public school for all families in Charleston.
Let me turn to some developing news. The Post-Inquirer, as you know, basically said that the Charleston schools and the MUSC released a playbook to help reopen classrooms safely during the coronavirus outbreak. And I believe that there are at least 84 independent applications with the playbook. With those applications, should the Charleston County School District have a day when people are allowed to just walk around schools and make certain the standards are met?
I think that would be a fair approach to allow parents. I know with my daughter's public school, they're having leap days where the students will come in, I think meet the teacher. The guidance hadn't been all that clear. but they'll be able to do some initial type things. And parents will also be allowed to come in, buy T-shirts, do the kind of first week, first day things. Yes, I think it's totally fair, especially given, call it what it is. The plan and the communication has been very poor to date from CCSD, and that's, I think, contributed to an environment of uncertainty and distrust for family members and parents. So I think to help boost confidence in, yes, we have a sound plan, yes, we have safety protocols in place, I definitely think it would be appropriate to bring parents in, let them check out classrooms, sort of see visually what the district's plan has been, because to date it's been very difficult to understand what exactly the plan is. It seems like it changes every week, and parents and educators need stability and a clear plan, and they need to know what's going on. And so I think that would be appropriate for parents.
Now, you talk about that guidance. What should it look like now?
Yeah, so as we transition into the fall, and same principle in the summer, I've been a proponent for a plan that basically lays out 2 to 3 scenarios based on what the metrics are doing or disease rates are doing. That plan should have been communicated a long time ago. As a candidate, one of the big things that I believe needs to improve with CCSD is just the transparency and accountability. And that's everything. That's their finances. This is another specific example where transparency really needs to improve. So my suggestion would be for the district to lay out what the fall semester is going to look like and lay out different scenarios so that if we do see a resurgence in disease rates, parents know very clearly what step A, B, and C is based on that. It gives them time to plan. We have a lot of working parents and working families. They can't, find childcare at the drop of a hat. So they need to know, sort of what's the backup plan. If X happens, then I, will know what to do. Just the keeping parents in the dark and keeping educators in the dark has been really difficult. Educators have had a really hard time lesson planning. Am I planning for virtual instruction for the fall? Am I planning for in-person? So yeah, I'm a proponent of laying out basically the scenarios that could occur and laying out clear action steps of what will happen if we see a resurgence, if case numbers continue to go down, hopefully, and we shift back to more in-person learning, what happens then? Just laying that out and having a clear path forward is really important, again, for parents and educators to be able to plan accordingly.
Well, let me ask you this. You talk about those options. Should the Charleston County School District have the option for a hybrid model to accommodate, say, social distancing?
I think the priority should always be around student and staff health and safety. But I think other districts, we're learning from other districts that they have been implementing hybrid models. And so far, you're still very early in the process, but that appears to be working where they have been able to socially distance within schools. I've been a proponent all along around just the contact tracing and just better data, bringing better tracking of disease rates. So if somebody is sick or potentially sick, and I think nobody's sort of talking about the conversation that flu season is coming, and so we also need to be aware of somebody may have the flu and may exhibit symptoms that are similar to COVID. What's the district's clear plan around that? What are the protocols that they're going to give to staff around staying home? What's the backup plan around substitute teachers, making sure they have the capacity? I don't see that conversation taking place, just around all those logistics. And again, I think it leaves a lot of uncertainty for parents and educators. And all of those things can be solved. And so if I were actually on the board, I would really be pushing the superintendent to be very clear with parents and educators about the plan going forward. But in short, yes, I do think there is a world where we could, do the A/B type schedule. Other districts are doing it thus far. It seems like it's been working.
Would a virtual until safe or modified instruction approach be ideal?
I support what the district has done thus far. Again, they've done a poor job of communicating it, but I think we have to realize that some families can do, a virtual at home option, and some families cannot. They have working obligations. It may be a single parent. That setup just doesn't work for them. Every family is going to know what is best for their individual situation. They may have an elder relative in the home. It's too hard to predict. So I'm not in favor of sort of a universal one or the other. I do think the options have been good, but the options need to be clear and provide a clear path. So I do support a virtual only option. So a family may be able to say, that's the right option for me. We want to do that. And I also support having either a modified AB type schedule or some level of in-person learning for those families that may need that option as well. And we're not really also talking about the difference. Again, I think we need to get away from this kind of one-size-fits-all thinking with the plan. I've seen districts with plans around bringing elementary students back while keeping our middle and high school students. And we think about the virtual learning component, that fits a little bit better. Middle and high school students are older, may have the technology skills. So to be able to actually learn, that fits better. We're not really talking about that in Charleston, and I think we should be about potentially bringing elementary students back. We also, that could take place. But so, yeah, I would be in favor of just kind of moving away from one size fits all. We do sort of either everything this way or everything this way. I do think options are good for families, and families are really going to be the ones who know what's best for their students and their personal situations.
Have you been able to talk to anybody in the Charleston County School Board to see if they can adopt this?
No, I've provided some feedback, but I think the feedback goes into, I don't know where it goes. I don't know where. I do think board members are listening to parents and community members, and I think we've seen that in some of the changes they've made. So I do think there is an effort to listen to parents, but I don't know exactly where the disconnect is. If it's between the board and the superintendent. Just yesterday, the superintendent was at a Mount Pleasant committee meeting, and then there's a sort of another big curveball to the plan that hadn't been announced before, and I think it took a lot of parents by surprise. And I think that's what needs to end. Again, I'd be in favor of, here's our plan, scenario A, B, and C, based on what conditions and disease rates are doing. Put it out there, be transparent, so that parents and educators have time to plan accordingly.
What comprehensive plan do you hope to draft up to actually save the virtual academy? Let's say if you were on the school board right now.
Yeah, so I have experience with virtual learning models, and I just candidly say I don't think they work for every student and family. So I'm actually in favor of getting back to normal as much as we can related to in-person learning, which really takes on more of a hybrid approach. I don't think the districts, I think they were well intended, but I don't think they had some of the logistics worked out. I heard initially that they had only hired 12 teachers for the virtual academy. I don't know if that's actually true or not. But if it were, that's very problematic given, if you just put the two together, if they were saying only 25% of students can come back in person, well, that means 75% would have to find some other option, and 12 teachers is not going to be able to serve 75% of the district students. So that kind of basic math, pulling out my high school math teacher thinking there, that just wasn't going to work. And so, I don't know who's in charge of all the logistic planning, but those questions need to be asked around capacity. And I do support the idea that for the stability of students, that to the extent possible, we can match students' homeroom teachers or in-person learning teacher to be their virtual teacher. But again, we're playing catch up to where, a number of teachers have not been trained on best practices for virtual instruction. I think they had basically a week. When the district pivoted again, there were a number of teachers who had basically a week. They learned, oh, hey, I'm going to be a virtual instructor now. Okay, what do I do? And that's just really unfair to teachers. And so that's, going back to what this fall will look like, come up with a really clear plan. If we're going to have a significant portion of the fall be through virtual instruction, let's try to pair our students' homeroom teachers as their instructor on virtual learning. But we need to, significantly improve the support we're giving teachers and educators around virtual instruction. If it's lesson planning, if it's how to conduct formative assessments, via virtual learning. The time was June. We can't go back in time, but the time is now to figure that out so that we stay away from, all these back and forth changes. We just need the time to prepare, just because students need to get back to some form of normal learning. And it's really, I think, on the district's management to provide that clear path forward.
Now, how should Charleston County School District teachers and staff have access to, say, immediate and ongoing testing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually would be in favor of a plan. This may be a little controversial, but I would be in favor of a plan this year where we maintain student testing, but we release teachers from any kind of accountability tied to their testing. So, for example, I would not hold any kind of testing related to their evaluations this year. And why I say I think we need to keep testing in place is because we need to know where students are. There were news articles in the spring that something like 20,000 students statewide were just unaccounted for.
Right.
We don't know really the impact that, sort of suddenly being out of school in March. We know that summer learning loss among many of our low-income students is a severe and significant phenomenon. So I think we need to test to almost re-baseline where our students are. We just need to know specifically what skills they're progressing towards and what skills they don't. And that's where I think a test could serve a function. But I do think, just given how atypical this year has been, we shouldn't hold teachers, to any kind of metric on the test. But I do think it's important that we still test our students. So that's what I would be in favor of.
And how should daily health screenings take place for the teachers and students and staff, in your mind?
That's a great question. I actually think our schools, just given the touch points and connections they have with families in the community, I would actually be in favor of having many of our schools be testing centers. Again, back to this idea of not having a lot of the data around who may have COVID, who doesn't. I think we have an opportunity to partner with local health organizations to turn our our schools into testing centers. That way we could, if a staff member or a teacher was, maybe feeling a little off, they could get a test right there. It's convenient. I suffer from allergies in Charleston. I think many people do. So we have fall allergies coming as well. And I think it's going to be anyone's guess as to what somebody actually has between allergies, the flu, in COVID. And so, schools are outside of kind of the whole testing process in South Carolina, but linking the two together where we have just that testing ability within schools, I would be in favor of that. So to the extent that we can partner with local health organizations, I think we should look into that.
And I know earlier you talked about, and I'm switching over now, to obviously you talked earlier about essentially having more transparency within the Charleston County School District. What type of bureaucracy do you see within the school district?
Yeah, so in my experience as an educator, central offices are not what leads to great instruction across all schools in a school district. So if we step back for a moment, we need to realize and recognize that Charleston County has 84 schools. It's a 100-mile long county. So we literally have Jane Edwards Elementary on Edisto Island, and we have James B. Edwards in Mount Pleasant.
Right.
Those schools and the students they serve are quite different. Both elementary schools, but the needs of the students in a rural setting on Edisto and a suburban setting in Mount Pleasant are different. So putting that back into the way our school district governance happens now, there are many what I would call kind of one-size-fits-all decisions that happen within the central office, whether that's around decisions with staffing, whether that's decisions around curriculum choices, maybe supports for teachers. Many of those are just all routed through central office. And I've seen a pattern around adding additional staff members and spending to central office. I think that's the opposite of what we need to be doing. I think we need to be shifting resources and instructional spending more to our schools. That's where our students and our staff members are. And if you think about it, it's just the opportunity cost. If we add $150,000 staff member to central office, that's really 2.5 reading interventionists that could be in our schools. And our schools need additional guidance counselors, school psychologists, reading interventionists. And so I'm very much in favor and been clear about this in my campaign. I really believe we need to decentralize spending out of central office, and we need to give principals more flexibility. So back to the example of the Jane Edwards and the James B. Edwards, I think if principals had more flexibility in decision making on their budgets, the principal at Jane B. Edwards may say, "Hey, I need 2-3 extra reading interventionists," and they have the flexibility and autonomy to make that decision because they realize that's what's best for their students. The principal at James B. Edwards may say, I'm going to add additional language teachers. The school, incorporates world languages, so they teach French now, but that principal may say, I'm going to add a Spanish teacher. I think that, flexibility and autonomy should be there, and it's not right now. And I think we'll see higher success for our students if we are able to deploy more of those resources into schools. Because I think our principals and our local teachers know our students better than our central office does. They see them every day. They see them every week. So I'm much more in favor of pushing those resources to our schools and making sure they're spent, in classrooms at a higher degree.
Now, how much money would you send to Fryson Elementary, Baptist Hill, West Ashley High School?
Yeah. So I think I would follow the state's. So the state's EFA funding formula is designed to be a weighted student funding formula. The idea behind it is that a student who may be academically behind, or maybe a student with a disability, should be resourced at a higher level. And so I think that same principle should carry out among our schools in Charleston. It doesn't always, because of the way central office staffing formulas work, But I do think that we should look at an equitable funding formula. Like what we're speaking about here is really an equitable funding formula. And so I do support the concept of sending, on a per pupil basis, a higher amount to schools that have higher demonstrated needs based on their student population. I think that's the most fair and equitable way to fund schools. And so I can't specifically give you a dollar amount, but I would say that the funding should follow the child and the student characteristic. And so based on the student demographics of Fryson or Baptist Hill, we should be equitably funding those schools.
Now, what is the graduation rate for West Ashley High School?
I don't have the exact number offhand, but I think the graduation rate in all of our high schools has room to improve.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. What is the poverty index for that school for the 2017-2018 semester?
I believe it's around 60%. Could be off on my number there.
Okay.
What number do you have?
Oh, let me ask you this too. What percentage of students at West Ashley High scored a C or higher on the algebra, biology, or English gateway course assessments for the end of course semester for 2017-2018?
I don't have that number offhand either.
Okay. Were there any growth in the reading or math scores as you know it?
I could look it up. I haven't taken a look at, typically MAP isn't tested in, say, 11th and 12th grade. MAP goes to 10th. So I have not seen a dashboard, a CCSD dashboard, where they report on MAP as an interim formative assessment. And I haven't seen that reported at the high school level. I've seen that reported more for the elementary and middle schools.
What is the average ACT score for an 11th grader at West Ashley High School?
Again, I don't have that number right offhand.
What is the average year of a teacher's experience at Baptist Hill High School?
I don't have any of these numbers offhand. I could look them up in a few minutes if you'd like me to do that.
Now, you talked earlier about MAP. How many students at James Allen Elementary are meeting or exceeding the MAP percentage in math or reading?
Which school? James Island?
James Allen Elementary.
I'm not going to have any of these figures, immediately offhand, but I can look them up.
No worries. Let me ask you this. How should the Charleston County School District re-examine the education system? Should they start with at least 2 of the alternative schools?
Sorry, I'm not following your question.
How should the Charleston County School District re-examine the education system?
Yeah, so I would say we do not have a high quality public school for all children. I think that's very clear. There have been a number of reports in recent years around the achievement of students, and we have severe gaps in the achievement of students of color, students with disabilities, our English language learner students. And to me, that needs to change. There is an urgent need to improve our schools. So some of the things that I mentioned earlier around budgeting resources, how the money flows out to schools,
Right.
Giving additional autonomy to principals. I think those are key things we need to look at because we can better tailor the learning needs of our students to how we actually spend and deploy resources in our schools. And I think we will start to see gains if we can better match the resources to the needs of our students.
And I know this is a simplistic question, but how do you propose closing the achievement gap?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? I will say I don't think there's one thing that we could do. So I'm not a candidate who believes in silver bullets or easy buttons because I don't think there are any in public education. So I think the answer is multifaceted. I think additional resources to some of our highest need schools and higher need students. is important, but I also think we really need to look at how those resources are being spent. So there are some schools in Charleston that have pretty high per pupil expenditures now, and we're not seeing gains in student learning and achievement. And so we are spending a lot of money, but I think there's a lot of frustration around we're not seeing growth in student outcomes. We're not seeing the closure of those achievement gaps. And so, when we narrow it down to a specific feeder pattern of an elementary, middle, and high, where we're seeing some of those achievement gaps, I mean, we have, again, lots of challenges. Excuse me. So I think we need to look at it from a multidimensional lens of we do need to focus on things like a higher quality curriculum that's more rigorous and more relevant for students. I do think we need to look at additional supports for educators and staff members in those schools. I do think we should look at, again, matching the resource to the need of students. So we know that many of our students who, are behind or not on grade level struggle with early literacy early on. I'm a really big proponent of early childhood education, and that's somewhat of an outside of a school district question. The Charleston County Schools has been expanding their 4K program, but I'm supportive of programs from birth to 5. So what is the proper role of the district to raise attention to that and the importance of early childhood learning, so that the research is really clear, Quintin. Those achievement gaps are present on the first day of kindergarten for our students. So how can CCSD partner with community organizations to improve the quality of early childhood education and learning, so that we aren't seeing those gaps the first day of kindergarten? So, I mean, we could probably sit here for, an entire day and come up with a list of things to do. I will say, tying it back to the district, there were some plans mentioned in Mission Critical. Right. To date, I haven't seen many of those plans executed. So we spent a lot of time as a community, a lot of money as a community on those consultants. We came up with a plan, but it's not really being executed to the extent that I can see. If we were to do an audit around what recommendations have been implemented to date, I think we would find that not many have been. I think there's actually a lot more that needs to be done outside of what was mentioned in Mission Critical. So.
And that brings me to my next question. I don't know if this is even sensible, but how should the Charleston County School District replicate the results, say, of Meeting Street schools to fix some of these districts' underperforming schools?
Yeah. So I've been clear that I'm supportive of investing in our neighborhood schools and a limited set of, call them third-party operators, call them public charter schools. I don't think every school should be a public charter school, but very much believe we can have a both and philosophy. And so I think it's not as easy as saying, oh, we need to do what Meeting Street is doing in a Charleston County district managed school. There are quite a few significant differences. Funding levels are actually similar. Or district managed schools, some of them are actually at higher per pupil levels. But it really comes down to, I think, the leadership of those schools and the governance. So, what I was talking about at the beginning of our conversation, that model really is present around resource autonomy and autonomy for the leadership of Meeting Street to make decisions that are the best for their students. We just don't really have that right now for CCSD. So before we start saying like, oh, XYZ elementary school in Charleston should just do what Meeting Street is doing, we don't even have the governance structure nor the way the funding flows to replicate what they're doing. So I do think I'm very much supportive of the sharing best practices. So I would want to approach Meeting Street and say, hey, can a district managed school leader shadow your principal for a week? Could some of the district managed teachers attend your professional development? I don't know what Meeting Street would say. I think they would be open to the concept. But I do think more of that should be taking place around best practice sharing, so that we can take the lessons learned and the successes that schools like Meeting Street are having, and have an ability to impact more kids in Charleston. But it's not as simple as, I hear things like, in that Charleston County District School, we should just do 2 teachers in every classroom like Meeting Street does. That's way too simplistic, and the Meeting Street is not having success just by putting 2 teachers in every classroom alone. There are a lot of components that go into why they're having success around having a strong curriculum, having strong data-driven instruction, having strong training, support and coaching for those teachers, having that resource ability that I talked about.
Right.
So kind of similar to when you asked the achievement gap question, if we're going to replicate success in a district managed school, which I totally believe we can do, I've seen it in other district managed schools around the country, there's some study that has to take place, so that leaders know that it's not just I do these 2 or 3 surface level things like hire per pupil, 2 teachers in every classroom. It's a lot more in depth than that. And I think if somebody went over and spent a month in residency at Meeting Street, they could really gather, what are the very small details that Meeting Street does on a daily basis that leads to success for kids. When I was helping to support the charter schools in Tennessee that I helped incubate, we would always say, sweat the small stuff, because the small stuff matters every day. And so I think, what I've seen thus far is that Meeting Street pays attention to really small details that end up mattering, on the whole for kids. So I think we can replicate successes in district managed schools, but it's going to take, I think, more sharing of best practices. I think Meeting Street would be open to that. We have to really study what they're doing, and then implement it in district schools.
This might be a tough question.
Okay.
Does the Coalition for Kids matter?
So my stance on that is I will speak to anybody, any group or any individual in Charleston who states that they want to improve our public schools. I may not always agree on policy issues. Voters need to know that I am independent. I've committed to taking no PAC or special interest money during my campaign. So I'm not taking any money from the coalition. I will talk with them. What they choose to do around their endorsements is their decision. But I will talk with other groups in town, who are call them the anti-coalition. I'm running for school board to improve our public schools for all kids. I don't, it's a nonpartisan race.
Right.
I personally am an independent, so I don't lean one way or the other. I just want great public schools for all kids. And honestly, if we achieve that through a mix of district managed, magnet, charter, maybe a few third-party operator schools, when I talk with families, at the end of the day, they care about their school being a high-quality public school, meeting the needs of their students. I don't think I've ever encountered a family that says, I'm not going to that school because it's a magnet school, or, I'm not going to go to that school because it's a charter school. Families are looking for high quality schools. So I think there just needs to be less attention paid on governance type and what specifically are the practices happening within schools. So, back to what I was mentioning about Meeting Street, There's no reason why we can't have improved success in district managed schools, learning lessons from Meeting Street. I think we should be doing that. I'm also skeptical of, the third party solution. That's been talked about in the district a number of times. I've been a charter authorizer. I've lived that. I know what to look for in potential groups. I'm not supportive of for-profit operators. I think there's a disconnect when a profit motive is on the table. So, if we're talking about any additional third-party operators to manage a public school, I'm open to the concept, but my bar is very, very high for entry. So they need to be a proven operator who's had success somewhere else, and they have a very clear plan. They've spent time getting significant community input. I'm not in favor of, pulling somebody from another part of the country, and just plopping them into Charleston. Community input needs to be a significant part of what they do, because that builds trust with the community, that there's a relationship there always between a public school and a community. And so if a third party operator is going to enter the conversation, that would basically be my criteria. Have you done significant community input, talked with parents, community members? Do you have a really clear and strong plan for improving the school? And are you a proven operator? So I think we need to look at that, sparingly, and have a really high bar for entry. But I would be open to the concept.
And what more questions do you have for the Coalition for Kids?
I've browsed their website, so I've seen some of their priorities, similar to other groups in town. I've spent time browsing their websites, and I've connected with individuals. The coalition, I don't know who all the members are, but again, I'll speak with and partner with anyone who wants to help improve our public schools in Charleston. So whether that's a Republican, a Democrat, if it's an elected official, if it's my neighbor, if there's a common interest in improving public schools, say, let me hear your ideas and let me hear how we can make the school board better in terms of how it operates for all of our families across Charleston.
Well, Hunter, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate the conversation. And again, thanks for doing all that you do and the interviews and, bringing a light and more transparency to everything that happens in our state and local governments.
Well, you're very welcome. Anytime, just doing God's work.
Yeah, appreciate it. Be well. Thanks, Quintin.
Likewise. You're welcome.